Welcome back to the Woven Energy Podcast on Real Practical Shamanism with me, Joseph Sikora, and as always, Damon Smith. We are here once again to talk about shamanism from the ground up. So this week, I was thinking, I wanted to ask Damon a question, and that question was, is Damon a shaman? And I thought it'd be a really interesting kind of question to ask him because knowing Damon, it would result in quite an interesting discussion. But that kind of morphed from there into the general question of what is a shaman? So that is the question we're going to pose today. What is a shaman? And the good news is, you might have heard us talk about it a few times on this podcast. Go back to the beginning of the podcast and listen in order and all that kind of stuff, which is true. This podcast is more like an encyclopedia that you need to go through from the beginning in order to learn all the nuances and how the procedure of how to become a shaman through those steps. However, this is going to be a really good episode to listen to if you're new to the podcast. So let's get cracking. Damon, how are you doing?
I'm good, mate. How are you?
I'm not bad at all. Not bad. It's absolutely leathering it down here. So if the pitter-patter of rain comes through the microphone, then just accept its nature, making its way into the podcast.
Yeah, you lucky soul. Unfortunately, all we've got is sunshine in Cornwall.
Oh, really?
Yeah. What can you do?
What can you do indeed? So I understand we have a patron to thank before we get started.
Our new awesome patron, Sebastian Lutic. Thank you very much for joining the tribe, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much.
It's just amazing that we keep getting these awesome patron people who are so kind to us and help us out in so many different ways. Just amazing. So thanks, Sebastian. Welcome. And it goes thanks, obviously, to all our other patrons, which is probably what Joe was just about to say.
I was actually going to say, that goes without saying. And then I was actually going to say, if you do want to support us on Patreon, you can, of course, head to patreon.com/wovenenergy. Support us over there for however much you want and get some extra bits and pieces. So, Damon, I'm going to ask the question anyway to get us started. Are you a shaman? Because I've never seen you wear the shaman clothes and
it's such a tricky thing because to say yes, I've kind of devoted a large part of my life to the practice of shamanism. So a better question would be, Damon, do you want to be a shaman? That would be a much better question. Do you aspire? And you could say yes in a way because, of course, it all comes down to the definition of that word, shamanism. And there are several aspects to that. I mean, in one way, I can't be a shaman. A shaman. It's not possible for me to be a shaman because I don't live in a animistic hunter-gatherer society. It's not possible for me to be a shaman in the purest sense, say that take the Evenki people 200 years ago, they had proper shamans, those guys, because they were properly hunter-gatherer people in a properly animistic society with proper shamans who were giving them strategic direction about things like, hey, how to deal with these Christian guys that keep invading us. That was the kind of role of the shaman in their society. But am I somebody who does the things that I personally would describe as characteristics of a shaman in a broader sense? Then I try to do those things. One of the things that shamans have always done is try to help other people. And I definitely try to do that. To what extent I succeed or fail, I'll leave others to judge. But and how do I try to help them? I try to help them by opening their spirit to nature, to a side of reality that is with us all the time, part of who we are, part of what made us who we are. I mean, we as human beings. But because of the constructs that we've made in creating our societies, our civilized societies very recently, and our exoteric religions, all this kind of stuff, it's all new, that stuff, brand new, compared to the history of even human beings, let alone the world. I mean, human beings haven't been around that long, a couple of million years, really, depending on how you define human beings. But a couple of million years is still a huge amount of time compared to the sort of 10,000 years maximum that we've had this thing that we call civilization, something approaching modern society. I'm trying, we are trying, you as well, Joe, we are trying to, in our small way, to point people back towards some of the better aspects of that part of the 2 million year period that came before 10,000 years ago. Sure, there are positive aspects of modern life and modern society. I mean, just the fact that we can contact people all over the world, we can reach out and touch people all over the world through our podcast is part of this amazing thing called the internet. That is part of civilization, as part of society. So sure, there are positive aspects, but there are also positive aspects to the way that we used to live. I mean, to give a simple example of that is small self-organizing teams in modern workplaces tend to outperform large hierarchical teams. We used to genetically and in terms of our heritage, we're used to working in small self-organizing teams. Small self-organizing team is a kind of business way to describe a hunter-gatherer tribe. It's a small number of people who self-organize and they do what they need to do in order to survive, prosper, practice their shamanism and animism, and have fun and dance. So in the business, in set up societies, if you model work teams on, in modern business, if you model work teams on our old hunter-gatherer ways of working together, they tend to outperform the modern, what I mean by modern is last 10,000 years, hierarchical teams, which consist of lots of layers of authority and large numbers of people. And this has been demonstrated time and time again. There are people like the work of Harlan Mills, for instance, at IBM during the 70s. He looked at what made people actually productive. He was looking at software developers, but it could have been anything. What made people productive, and what makes people productive is generally, I could always go as far as to say, is that what comes intuitively to, seemingly intuitively to highly miasmatic, hierarchically minded people who are iterating or reinforcing the ways of working of early civilization builders like Qin Shi Huangdi in China, for instance. This sort of command and control. I'm the king and I have my ministers and they have their generals and the generals have their sergeants and all that kind of stuff. Those layers and layers. Organizations that are organized like that tend to do very badly against organizations that are portfolios of self-organizing teams. This study's been done again and again and again.
It's kind of a case to be made for, like distribution of power to lots of local governments rather than big central government, right?
Yeah.
It's a case to be made for that kind of system.
Yeah, it's basically a sort of decentralization, but it's also about the change of the direction of where the tactics go. In a lot of modern hierarchies, be there governmental hierarchies or organizational hierarchies, business hierarchies, military hierarchies, in a lot of those hierarchies, both the strategy and the tactics run from the seniors to the juniors in the hierarchy. But what's been found as a much more effective way to run these things, any of them, is to have the strategic vision, the strategic leadership coming from what you could call seniors, if you like. But so that's, what does the Emerald City look like? What does our better life look like as a group, as a tribe, as a team, as a business, as a government, as a country? What does our better life look like out there in the future? And the kind of seniors, if you like, evangelize that idea and inspire people within the group. But figuring out how to get there is the responsibility of the other people within the group. The problem when the seniors start making those sort of how to get there decisions is they're usually really bad at it. Really, really bad at it.
I mean, I don't want to open up a can of worms here, but, just one thing that struck me as interesting, shall we say, was when, the whole Russia-Ukraine thing, when they were saying that the reason why Ukraine has had, quote unquote, success against the Russian army is because of how the command and control structures of the Russian army versus the Ukrainian army is set up. Russia is very, very top down, and Ukraine is very much let's give power to the local, whatever they're called, the local groups of soldiers and commands over there. So they're free to make more decisions for themselves rather than having to obey top down.
It's not just about making decisions for themselves. It's also about making decisions in context. The people who are closest to the context know what's happening on a second-by-second basis. They are there. If you're remote from those people and you're telling them what to do, in context, you're likely to not take everything into account. However able you are as a leader, you're likely not to take everything into account that they are able to because they're facing it. So the much better thing you can do as a leader is inspire them. And you can see in Ukraine that their senior leadership is certainly doing that very well. Yeah. But it is a good example. I mean, the all-time classic example is the Battle of Midway, isn't it? The turning point in the Pacific War. You had, to simplify, you had the Japanese following a master plan decided by very senior people, and you had the American fleet responding to changing events on a minute-by-minute basis. And surprise, surprise, that was the turning point. There was nothing wrong with the ability of the Japanese military. It was the fault, the problem was in how they were run. They weren't as adaptive as the US military. In that case, I'm not saying there aren't other instances where other parts of the US military did badly, but the Navy certainly did very, very well at that point in time in World War II. So the coming back to the general point, I was given that as an example of something that comes from our remote past as human beings, and not just as human beings, as primates, because a lot of other primates organize themselves in this way as well, that is still useful to us today, and we can still leverage and we can still do great things with. But it doesn't mean we have to reject our computers and our internet and all that kind of stuff and come into some sort of, go back to nature. I mean, sometimes so it has to be said that may seem a little bit tempting. And I sort of do that on a small scale myself. I run off overboard my mirror and disappear into the horizon kind of thing, It's, but I do come back. At least so far I have. If I suddenly disappear one day, what's happened. The point is that there's value in both. There's value in civilization and there's value in shamanistic ways of living. The value in shamanistic ways of living got us to where we are. That's what got us to 10,000 years ago and put us in the position to do what we did 10,000 years ago. It started places like Çatalhöyük. It started places like ancient Jericho, the ancient Middle East, ancient Egypt, ancient China, and then sort of built out from there. So when I'm saying 10,000 years ago, it wasn't 10,000 years ago everywhere in the world. It sort of spread out civilization from that sort of time forwards. I mean, even, 3,000 years ago, you could find very, very shamanistic societies all over the world. And 200 years ago, you could find very, very shamanistic societies in some places in the world. So that's what, so is Damon a shaman? I'm trying, and along with Joe and our wonderful patrons and Graham and several other people now, I could almost say many other people now, trying to open people's eyes to the value of what went before. Call it an archaic revival, if you like, a lightweight archaic revival. And in a way, that has become my shamanism, is to help other people to understand and learn to practice shamanic technique. another way to apply shamanic technique is like literally use shamanic technique to help people. You can do that
You're one
as
step
well.
ahead. I was going to ask you about that.
But when you really understand shamanism, you see that there's also stuff like that in what I do as well. What I don't do is what a lot of shamans do, is charge people for treatments and stuff like that. I don't do that. I don't like that model of being a shaman. Not to say that there aren't shamans who can help people in that way in the world, but I try other ways. And as you know, Joe, I've helped people in social terms, helped a lot of people in life in general, how to live better, more vibrant, interesting lives. So that's my other way that I try to do it. And in the definition of what is a shaman is a figure who tries to strategically help originally a small community of people around them to live better lives. First of all, to survive, but then beyond survival, to live better lives. And that's really what the role of a shaman is. But what a shaman does is use nature as a guide in influencing them how to go about doing that. Yeah. And I try to do that. Yeah. But it sounds a bit boastful to me because I have such a high opinion of what I think a shaman is that to me, claiming to be a shaman is a bit boastful. I always aspire to be a shaman.
Is it one of those things where if you say you're a shaman, then you're not?
I don't know, man. I don't know. What that does remind me of is one of my teachers said this to me in a jokey kind of way. We'd been to people probably know I do martial arts. And we'd been to a big martial arts demonstration. There were a lot of different martial arts there, but there was this one particular martial art. I don't know what it was. These guys, the guys that were masters in this martial art, they had a master badge, literally with the English word master stitched onto their practice uniform. And my teacher goes, if you need a badge, you're not.
Okay, so let me ask you probably a simplistic question. Okay, so fair enough. You said, okay, I aspire to be one who helps others on their shamanic path, let's say, or open their eyes to the shamanic path. That's fine. How would you say your own specific core shamanic technique, as in, okay, Damon, we've talked so much about going through the stages now, and we're doing the spirit dance, and you would go on your journey. So, simplistically speaking, what would be your purpose for doing an actual going through the stages, going through the techniques, and actually going on a shamanic journey?
So first of all, the spirit journey is one of the other things I've tried to do is make it clear that the spirit journey is not the be all and end all of shamanism. It's a famous technique or group of techniques. It's a important group of techniques, but it is far from everything there is to shamanism. One of the things that concerns me and to being a shaman is that I see a lot of people talking like the epitome of shamanism is the spirit journey. So the epitome of shamanism is not the spirit journey. The spirit journey is just simply an important stage of technique in shamanism. It is definitely not the highest level.
It's stage 5, right?
Shamanic technique.
Stage 5, stage 6.
So
it stage
again,
6?
It depends how you count the stages. Yeah, but the Island, you can call it stage 6 if you like.
6, yeah.
So, but it depends how, I'm also concerned about that. There are 7 stages of shamanism, and currently I'm also concerned about that, Shamanism is a subtle and nuanced things. It's a holistic thing that isn't so analytical on the baseline as the rest of our lives. It's not so analytical as I see it in business a lot in my work. Let's do planning. Let's sit down and do planning. I hear that all the time. Let's get down on the baseline and in our minds analyze everything that's going on and figure out the best way to do it. And then having done our planning, let's set out to execute our plan that we made in a room in isolation from anything that's going on and see how well we do against our plan. Into that built in the assumption is that the plan is any good or we got it right. But also is this idea of checking our progress against the plan, that's a desirable thing. Maybe the plan is garbage. Yeah. Maybe we'll find out on day 2 that the plan is garbage. Checking our progress against it then becomes less of a desirable thing. Yeah. So
but you've got to have a goal, right? If you're in a business, then you've got an end goal. You've got to somehow at least lay down the groundwork for a path to reach that goal. Otherwise, you could end up with complete chaos.
Well, that's the assertion that's made by people who are into planning. I respectfully disagree.
Well, not so much planning, but more like this is where we need. This is the kind of the goal of what needs to be achieved. So at least just saying that, this is what we need to achieve, then that's kind of like a plan. Because we need to get to that point.
That's not the way to do it. To me, that's not the way to do it. To sit down in a room in isolation from life, and then as a group of people, I've been on a member of company boards. I've been in that group, sitting in the boardroom, in isolation from life, in isolation from anything that's going on, sat around doing baseline ratiocination with my fellow directors as to what a good goal, what's our key objective, and what metrics are we going to use to measure our process towards achieving our key objective. We're forgetting in doing that we're people, we're human beings, we're primates. A much better way to look at that, and a more shamanistic way to look at that, is what does a better future look like? What is out there 5 years from now? What amazing things could be happening in the world that our company could be involved in, our organization could be involved in? And then rather than saying, here is what we want to do out there in the future, it's more of a, let's paint a picture of where we all could be doing better. Everybody could be in a nicer, happier, warmer place than we are now, and strongly evangelize that vision without deciding what we need to do in order to get there. And then, having evangelized that picture, paint this picture of a beautiful emerald city, to use the Wizard of Oz metaphor. There's this beautiful emerald city out there in our future. Maybe we'll paint a painting of it or something like that, or just using vivid description, and allow that to act as an attractor. So what we're not doing is pushing people out into the future in the role that a manager would, or a general would, or a king would. And might be being unfair to some generals. There has been some extremely shamanistic generals in history. So let's drop that. A manager or a king would push them towards that goal by telling them what to do in order to get there. Much better, paint a vivid picture of what that Emerald City looks like, and then allow our community, our group as a whole, to pull together and be pulled into the future by that vision, deciding their own tactics, their own way of achieving that goal. So do you follow what I'm saying? That's a much more top-line approach. We're inspiring them into a better future. They build themselves rather than deciding what that better future is for them and telling them how to get there.
So in my personal experience, because to give you an example of something I'm doing right now with my Creative Piano Academy, it's like, okay, my next phase of Creative Piano Academy is in general to tackle paid advertising, right? So instead of everything being organic, I want to use paid advertising. But to get to that goal, there are there are several very specific things that we need to do. Now, so I need to lay down the path of how we get to that lofty goal of just using paid ads, right? Now, with my team, I do exactly what you've just said. So what I try to do is I try and go, okay, here's the kind of the general path that we need to walk down, and we need to walk down towards this goal of tackling paid advertising. But and then I need to think, okay, so what is it that we're going to advertise? Now, once we've decided what it is we're going to advertise, what you're going to do, you've got freedom and creative input. And I'm going to give you an overview of like what the general Emerald City, to quote you, might be. Do it, and just, come up with some ideas.
And then they have ownership. And then it's their baby. Then it's their baby and not your baby. That's the point.
And not only have I found the work to be better, but I've found that they go the extra mile. I've found that they are more enthusiastic and are energized about doing it.
Yeah.
So it's not quite like I still need to lay down that structure. That's what I'm trying to reconcile. I still need to lay down the structure of where we're going, but within the journey through that, I can give them autonomy. I can give them freedom. I can trust in their ability to deliver on their skill and what they've learned in life and bring that to the table.
Yeah, and I don't like the phrase "laid down" because it sounds bad. But anyway, yeah, generally that's the idea. But I mean, to me, included in that is, for me as a leader, if I was in the same situation you're in, I would be extolling the benefits of we don't have paid advertising, and we're going to have paid advertising. I would be extolling the benefits of having it to my team, so that they understand not just what we need to achieve, but much more important, why we need to achieve that. Yep. Start with why. It's a really famous phrase in business, and it's paid lip service to far too much. Don't pay lip service to start with why. Really, really do it. And that is the inspiration. That's the top line. That's the top line coming into it. Why do we want to do this? And it's not a logical baseline explanation of why. Is what does, for instance, in your case, paid advertising, how does that make our organization a more awesome organization? And what can we build on top of that in future that we can't do now? If we get there, do you follow what I mean? So that's the top line approach to it, is not to push people to organize people into the future, but to inspire people into the future. And you can, if you look at the world's great business leaders, have they ever, some of them, have they ever done that? It depends. I guess it depends what you mean by a great business leader. But a lot of those guys are very successful guys. Take Gabe Neal, for instance. They're very inspirational people. And
I mean, it helps if you have a good team around you, doesn't it? A good capable team.
Okay, we're going to have to change the title of this podcast. No. I want to address that point. It's an important point. Yeah. I think we're doing this a bit cart before the horse, because we've started off with, what do you do as a shaman? What's your role as a shaman? And we wanted to say, what is a shaman? And those things are two different things. In order to do these things that we've been talking about, to be able to do these things that we've been talking about, it helps to be a shaman in order to do that. We haven't addressed what being a shaman means at all yet, which was the original idea for this subject of the podcast. But I do want to address the point around where this is all going to take us. So sorry, can you just repeat your last question, mate? Just repeat it.
I was saying you have to. I mean, in order for all this to work, and you put trust in your team, the team needs to have a baseline level of capability and skill in whatever craft that they're.
Okay, so here's a point. I've worked with a lot of different organizations as this roving consultant. In defense of bad management practices, that I've seen, one of the main things that I've heard said or implied is that my team are not special. These are the guys that you keep talking about. They have amazing teams. They have teams of high-flying self-starters who crack on and get the work done. They're very special people. They're very capable people, and they can do amazing stuff. But my team, the team that usually the implication is, say it's a project manager for a particular project, my team that I've been lumbered with is not special. They're not the SAS. They're not high-flying self-starters. They're not Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong. They are ordinary slow Joes. And I have to give them an extra specially tight... I'm better than me insulting somebody else who I don't know and love, yeah? They are slow people. And not that bright and not that sparkly, yeah? And as a manager, I'm sat there believing that that's to do with all the bad recruitment that went on in our organization. We got these no-hopers kind of thing. That's completely wrong. You turned them, if you're their manager and you've been there a while, you turned them into these no-hopers. It was you that did that through your management approach. Because any team can be a special, sparkly, wonderful Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin team. I know that because I've seen supposed teams of no-hopers turn into the A-team. I've seen it. I've seen it with my own eyes through a change not of the people on the team, not of them going on training courses, but simply through a change of leadership approach. I've seen
so one of the things we could say
into superstars
is what does it mean to be a shaman? One of the core tenets could be inspire in a very simplistic way.
Absolutely,
inspire.
That's what it means to do the
give
job.
Life
to do the job of a shaman. Yeah, but not what it means to be a shaman. That's something totally different. What it means to be a shaman, to answer the question, what is a shaman is somebody who is closer to nature than the average person in the street. Somebody who, through their own efforts, have taken on, which is quite unusual in our society, they've not just taken on their chemistry teacher and their biology teacher and their driving instructor and their priest as teachers in life. They've also taken another teacher, an unusual teacher, which is nature herself, as a direct teacher, bypassing people, bypassing books. And so what is a shaman really? A shaman is somebody who wants to understand what is going on under the covers, behind the facade that nature puts out to it. What's really going on behind there? And they don't just want to understand that in an intellectual way. They want to understand that in a fully participative, immersive way. They want to dive into and dissolve within nature and gain direct feedback from nature. It's not that they're rejecting human learning and books and stuff like that, because that would be stupid. That would be just another religion. What they're actually doing is saying there is another source of wisdom, another source of knowledge in this world, and it's a very big, powerful source of knowledge and wisdom. It is nature herself that I, as a person, want to immerse myself within. How do I do that? Well, first of all, I've got to set what I believe, what I understand to one side, and I've got to come with an empty cup to nature. I've got to get rid of all that stuff, my beliefs, my opinions, my faith, my understandings, my judgments. I've got to get rid of all of that stuff, and my social conditioning. Best of luck with that one. That's a toughie. I've got to get rid of all that stuff and come to nature with an empty cup. Then I've got to put, so that's chalice, yeah? Then I've got to figure out how can I best place myself in close proximity to nature, because a lot of us don't do this in our everyday lives. How can I best place myself in close proximity to nature such that nature can teach me in a holistic way, but also that it's manageable? once you go approach nature with an empty cup, you get a huge amount of stuff just thrown at you. Just huge volumes of stuff. How can I make sense out of that? How can I take this torrent of information that is the Encyclopedia Naturica? I don't know, my Latin's not good enough to whatever it is, but the Encyclopedia of Nature. How can I take that stuff in manageable chunks that I, a mere human being, can actually deal with one at a time? I need to start compartmentalizing my interactions with nature and putting some kind of parameters on them such that I'm not completely swamped, completely overwhelmed. And there's not one way to do that. There's thousands or millions of ways to do that. And those things, when I figure out how to do them, or somebody who else has figured out how to do it passes that on to me, those things are the techniques of shamanism. And I don't just want to do one of them, because I do want to understand a lot of different things about nature. I just don't want to be swamped. I want to pull out specific aspects and come to a holistic understanding. What I mean by holistic understanding is mind, body, and spirit all acting together as one in a state of chillicity. I want to compartmentalize different things. And each one of those different ways or approaches of doing that, and the many, many that future shamans will create that we've never used before, because there's no end to shamanic technique. Those are the techniques of shamanism. So I need to come with chillicity. So that's my first role, is what does it mean to be a shaman? Well, first of all, to be a shaman, you've got to be an animist. You must approach nature with an empty cup. That's your base. Without that, there's no real shaman. Without that, it's all imagination. Let's not talk about the imagination trap again on this one. Just refer people back to our episodes on the imagination trap. And then secondly, I've got to start applying technique in order to bring me closer to nature that I want to understand. I need technique in order to help nature help me. Where's the best place to start with that? Well, I could start anywhere, but the best place to start is the closest part of nature to me, which is my own body. And the energy changes that go on inside my body. That's Amska. That's what we've been calling level 2. That's the next thing I want to work on, because I've always got my body with me. So that seems like a fairly sensible place to start. And then, what can I do with my body within the context of nature? Hey, level 3. What do I... being able to do things with my body within the context of nature, how does that start to interact at a fundamental level within nature? What commonalities of the things that I can do with my body and my tools? Remember, we're tool using animals. In most animals' terms, that's just your body. But in human terms, we've also got this whole tool thing: drums and staffs and throat singing, all that kind of stuff. Other animals do that as well, incidentally. What can I do with those things? And what commonalities can I see within what those things are doing? Can I see out there in nature what energy changes, commonly occurring patterns with energy changes within nature, can I incorporate into my energy changes that are going on with what I'm doing with my body in the context of nature? There's your level 4. Then, surely I'm creating energy patterns, weaves that reflect the weaves going on within nature that I'm experiencing from nature. Those things are going to cross over each other, right? There's going to be some kind of interaction going on within them. That's level 5, level 4 into level 5, if you like. But as I've said before, if you just call it level 1, 2, 3, then this is still level 2. Yeah. Depends how you want to break up the sequence. But what I'm trying to say is there's a fundamental sequence there that is totally obvious when you understand how shamanism works. There's not really any other way it could work. There's not really any other way it could go. I mean, you could start doing stuff outside of you, but that's where you end up with this sort of scientific method. I could observe things at a distance and not participate in them, and I'm learning stuff on the baseline then, because it's not participative. I'm not learning anything in my body. I'm not learning anything in my spirit. I'm simply only learning things on one of the 3 ways there are to learn. So if you want to understand things holistically and experientially, shamanism is an experiential thing. I want to understand my relationship with the universe, my relationship with nature in a experiential, participative way. There isn't really another approach I can take. Yeah. And then once these interaction points between the energy patterns within myself and within nature, those crossovers start to become manifest to me, and I start to understand what they're about. I don't mean understand on the baseline. I don't analyze it. I just mean I'm starting to get a feel for it in my shamanic technique, whatever that may be. Then there is an option there to slip down into that in a spiritual sense. And this is the thing that people talk about with the spirit journey, if you like, to slip down into that, to slip into that which underlies nature, rather than everything being on the surface all the time. Yeah. And that's what people call the journey. But that's not the end of it. That's not or one of the ways that manifests itself is the journey. But there's also Kamigakari and various other ways that manifests itself. The journey is not the only set of techniques, broad portfolio of techniques that exist at that level. If you like, the level 6, if you want to call it that. Yeah. There's a level beyond that, which is, what are we trying to do all this time in order to become a shaman? We are trying to dissolve within nature. We're trying to get rid of that artificially created distinction, the distinction that's been created by our society. We're trying to be nature. And once that's the ultimate goal of a shaman, not the spirit journey, which is useful. I'll give you in a sec some examples of what you might use a spirit journey for. But the ultimate goal of being a shaman is to come back to nature, to return to innocence, to return back to the foundation of our experience as living human beings in this world, to a certain greater or less extent, to be a representative of nature, to be part of nature, to be fully synergistically part of nature, to be part of, so the weave of the universe and the weave of my life, this is the aspiration. There's no distinction between them. The energy patterns that go on within the universe and the energy patterns that go on within my life, there's no distinction between them. This is coming full circle as a shaman, and that is the ultimate goal. If you want to be a shaman, that's what we call the Nechdel, level 7 if you want to call it, to fully dissolve within nature. And that's a tall ask. That's a tall ask. And very few shamans achieve it, and that's why we talk about great shamans like Miki a lot on this podcast. There are people who can achieve that, but it's not a black and white. It's not something that happens like some sort of nirvana sitting under a Bodhi tree and all of a sudden it happens. Only baseline things happen like that in your mind, in your imagination. In reality, it's a matter of degrees and different points in time, and the state of the Nechdel is something that gradually hangs with you little bit by little bit over the decades of shamanic practice shamanic technique. It just gradually connects up like, I don't know, like a little dots lighting up in a big woven pattern, and those dots gradually dissolve all into one another. And at different times and at different states, it's a more or less a thing, and in different contexts, it's a more or less a thing. But that's what it means to be a shaman. Ultimately, what is a shaman? And this is why I find it boastful to claim to be a shaman. A shaman is someone who has dissolved within nature, such that the original person, at least in the case when they're practicing the shamanic technique, but to a certain extent, at all times, does not exist anymore.
Wow. Okay.
That's
and it's like, well, I was keen to let you go on that one, go on that journey, Damon. That was fantastic.
Yeah.
And also, of course, it's easy to think of nature as just mountains and streams, and rivers and things like that. But actually, going back to what we were talking about earlier, nature is also human nature. It's how we
Absolutely.
see, going back to the Amabella days, if we think of the universe as a tapestry of energy changes, and those energy changes that we talk about apply to virtually everything. And we talked about a few different ways that they can apply, right? Back in the Amabella days. One was personal interactions. Another was how those energy changes affect your path in life, if I'm not mistaken. What else did we, just to give people a general flavor?
So let's look at this a slightly different way. We did do it that way in Umbrella, and this is the same thing. But another way to look at it is human beings, we do have a nature. We have a problematic nature. We have a nature where it's not problematic. In some ways, it's very, very helpful. Nature, evolution, whatever you want to call it, has propelled us to a place where we have this tool called imagination. And more than any other planet, pick any human faculty, and there's probably an animal somewhere on the planet that's better at it than us. Yeah. Take eyes, vision, sight. We're quite good at it, but eagles make us look rubbish, right? Make us look absolutely rubbish. Yeah. So there's an example for sight. Yeah. Cleverness is debatable. Yeah. I always like that. I think was it Douglas Adams in one of his books? He said human beings thought they were more intelligent than dolphins because dolphins were always splashing about in the water and having fun. And dolphins thought they were more intelligent than humans for the same reason.
Splashing around in the water and having fun.
A large whale's brain is the size of a small car. Who's more intelligent? Different types of intelligence. And intelligence is one of these mad concepts that was invented by humans in the, I don't know, maybe before the 1950s, but it seemed to get popular in the 50s, so that we could self-congratulate ourselves, sort of pat ourselves on the back, or we're the most intelligent animal. But there was one thing that we do better than any other animal, and that is imagination. We got so good at it for a reason. Which is tool use. Other animals use tools. Orangutans go spearfishing. Chimpanzees make little probes to get ants out of behind the bark of trees and stuff like this. But nobody makes tools like Homo sapiens make tools. We make tools like the internet, for instance. In order to do that, we have this capacity in our brains to visualize something that doesn't currently exist, to visualize it in our brains in order to then make a progressive series of changes in the world so that it does exist. A great example of that would be like a stone axe. There's this piece of flint and a piece of wood, and I can visualize a sort of cutting a slot in the wood and using flint knapping. If you never tried that, have a go at it. It's hard to make the rock of flint into a nice, beautiful axe head shape. I can shove it through the stick, and then I can tie it in if I've shaped it cleverly and it's a nice tight fit. Tie it in with some twine or something like that I've made out of grass. Tie it into place. Maybe use heating and cooling to get a good tight fit in the stock. And then I've made a really useful tool. I make an axe, and now I can chop down a tree. With my bare hands, I wouldn't have a hope of chopping down a tree. Maybe an elephant can do that because elephants are cleverer than us at chopping down trees. But I've got a new way to do it. I've imagined this axe, and now I've made it. Yeah. And I need that ability to imagine the axe to exist as a tool using species. I need that ability. So that's great. Yeah, that's great. Nothing wrong with that. And we're very good at that as a species. But the downside of that is we can visualize stuff that isn't true and is never going to be true. Yeah. Like exoteric religion, for instance. I can visualize this heavenly deity up in the sky with a long white beard floating on a cloud. And I can believe that his whims and his desires he has created my universe, and what he wants and doesn't want is encoded within the universe. And if I behave in a bad way, he might smite me for that. And what I mean by a bad way is a way that he doesn't like. Yeah. So say behaving in a bad way is he doesn't like me to wear clothing woven of two different types of material because the god of Leviticus, one of the books in the Bible, really didn't like people doing that. That was a big no-no. So acrylic and polyester t-shirts, no way. Yeah. If I wear acrylic and polyester t-shirts, I might be smited by a thunderbolt in this life. Or when I die, I'm not going to get into heaven because I'm not following his rules. And I can live my life according to his rules, which are encoded in this book, this holy book. And also in his holy book, it kind of suggests that I should go around killing people who don't believe in him. Yeah. So I start a holy war, a crusade or a jihad or something like that against those other people over there who don't believe in this God guy who I'm imagining. I can use it as a great excuse to go and kill those guys and take their land and their jewels and their wealth and all that kind of stuff. That's a real downside to imagination because no other animal on the planet is able to do that either. Yeah. No other animal is able to create such a strong miasma as we have created. And
there's a yin and a yang.
So there's positives and negatives to the imagination. And another role that, not as a shaman, but as an esotericist, is to try to help people to the best of your ability. One of the things with shamans is they work on a very intimate basis. They work on a very direct basis. And I think the weird thing about what we've done with this podcast is we've taken that intimacy of the shaman working with another person, say you might want to call it an apprentice or whatever. We've taken that intimacy of that one-to-one that me and Joe used to do, for instance, when we used to read up in the coffee shop and go up into the woods and go out and look out over the lake and all this kind of stuff. We've taken that and we've spread it out to touched a lot of people all around the world, which is amazing. But that's a very modern thing to be able to do. And the approach of a shaman still has that sort of close one-to-one, gradual guiding. A shaman doesn't tell anybody what to do. What a shaman can do is give the benefit of their experience and give some guideposts. But then it's up to people if they want to take that into account, if they want to follow those guideposts for some direction. But in shamanism, the teaching always has to be a guiding. It has to be up to the other person, people involved. It has to be their decision, first of all, whether to do anything at all about that teaching, that guidance. And secondly, how to incorporate it into their experience of life and their shamanic technique and their shamanic practice. That has to be their baby, because if they don't, they won't own it. What you'll end up with, which is what you end up with a lot of these sort of, what we call them, fake shamanic cults, if you like, is you end up with a leader of the cult who's seen as like everyone else, oh, we're not worthy of the great, the great shaman, I don't know, Bob. Yeah, we're not worthy. They probably don't call him Bob. He's the amazing guy who makes all the decisions for us, and he's who tells us how everything is and all this kind of stuff. That is a rubbish learning experience for the people within that group. That's not the role of a shaman. A shaman is a leader of sorts, but they are a servant leader. They're not a bossy leader. They're not a tell you what to do leader. They're not a tell you how it is leader. I don't know how it is. I mean, within our little group of the Woven Energy podcast, I don't know how it is. Nobody knows what anybody else's life experience is. But what I can do is encourage people to go through a similar experience to the one I've been through in my life. It's similar in terms of, it's the attitude, isn't it? The average person in the street doesn't even think about, how would I get closer to nature? It's probably not a question that even occurs to them. So at the very least, what I can do as a shaman is just raise the question with people. If you just assume that you wanted to get a bit closer to nature, what would you do? How would you go about that? Here's how I've done it. Yeah. This is what I've done. Anything in this of use to you? Yeah. If the answer is no, then fine. Yeah. But really, you won't understand what's going on unless you do it. Unless it's your idea. It's you pushing it. It's your motivation. Yeah. I can inspire you by saying it's a great life. Practicing shamanism is a great life. For sure it is. One of the things that I've told my wife I want carved on my gravestone is no regrets. I absolutely have none. I've had an absolutely wonderful, wonderful life. And if anybody does my obituary and starts saying, oh, the poor guy, he died before his time and all that kind of stuff, I won't be happy. I've had an absolutely fantastic life, and I'm happy with it as it is today. If I die tomorrow, then, not that I want to die tomorrow, but, if I die tomorrow, then, so be it. Great life, no complaints. Amazing, actually, absolutely amazing. So I can try to inspire people in that way to give an idea of the wonder within nature and the wonderfulness of this shamanic approach to life, which is simply an investigative approach to life, but it's investigative on all those levels, and especially the physical level of life. That's why I like spirit dance. And the spirit level of life. Those are the places where we need the help. Our imagination ability seems to have this downside. Like many genetic adaptations, many evolutionary adaptations, they have an upside and a downside, and the upside outweighs the downside. They still perpetuate it on, but it doesn't take the downside away. We obsess over the baseline. We obsess over analysis. We obsess over planning. That you can take, and not to say there's not some value in that stuff. There is. But if you think that's the be-all and end-all of life, you're likely to end up being one of those people who does have regrets at the end.
Wow. Okay. So, inspire, guide, live your life without regrets.
No. That's a symptom. It's not something you set out to do, mate. That's a symptom of following this wonderful path. That just happens, mate. For please, nobody think that that's something you set out to do. Yeah.
Set out to inspire people, set out to guide people. Okay.
Maybe. No, you just asked me what a shaman does and what a shaman is. Ultimately, a shaman is somebody who wants to dissolve within nature.
Okay.
As they gradually approach that goal, they start to gain some wisdom, understanding that other people don't pick up on, little subtle things like, when's this guy going to hit me? Those little subtle things that give you, if, for instance, in that context, when's this guy going to hit you, gives you 1/10 of a second more warning than an ordinary person gets. Yeah. That type of thing. In little ways. Oh, I tripped up. Yeah. I haven't hurt myself. Little percentages here, there, that type of stuff. You meet somebody and they're not doing so well in life. Maybe they're unhappy. Maybe they've not had much luck in the world of work, and you help them. And you see the person themselves and what context they're in, and you maybe give them suggestions as to how they might change things a bit for the better based on the information that nature has given you and the life experience that nature's given you, and they end up in a better place.
And you also can equip them with tools, as well. Thinking back to the Amabella days, because as well as inspire and guide, you can also equip those people with very specific tools to play with, right?
Techniques.
In terms of the energy changes, techniques, yeah.
Yeah, you need techniques, because other than that, if you don't have techniques, if you simply approach nature in a state of chillicity, you will either get very little because you're not sensitive enough to it, but if you practice your chillicity for long enough, you will become, or you will be swamped, which is my feeling of nature, where I've got to in my shamanic journey. You'll be absolutely swamped by what nature throws at you. Nature, if nothing else, is a complicated thing. You will be absolutely swamped. And so the technique is to help you, not nature. Nature doesn't need the technique, you do. Is to help you make the shamanic learning experience manageable. That's the purpose of the techniques. But you need a lot of them because you still want to understand, broadly speaking, the wisdom and the knowledge that is there within nature, your teacher, that your teacher can help you, bring you to. you want to understand that broadly speaking, so you need lots of techniques to cover off different aspects.
Excellent. Well, I'm happy with that, Damon. Should we leave it there?
Yes, sir. Let's do that.
Excellent. Okay, thanks for listening, guys. I hope you found this as fun as I have. We probably talked about stuff at the end that we should have talked about at the start, and at the start at the end, but there we go. We got there in the end. You can think of these episodes as their own little journeys. So you can support us over at patreon.com/wovenenergy, and you can get some extra bits and pieces over there. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thanks a lot, guys.